My name is Luke Shulman. I am the Director of Agent Innovation at DataRobot. So I lead a research and development team on the practical interactions with AI agents. There are a ton of buzzwords associated with agents, like skills and MCPs and tools and so on and so forth. But I think especially for folks just starting out or folks who aren't as familiar with code, agents are basically just loops of context management. So it understands the system prompt, and then it goes and explores its environment and pulls all that stuff in from context and then tries to fulfill your task. And once you understand that mode of action, you can use it to your advantage to essentially allow an agent to code itself. And so what I'm demonstrating today is something that we call a context agent. A context agent only has 8 tools: cat, find, grep, tree, write, search and replace, and make directory. And then the last one is execute code. And we basically give the context agent a secure directory and a secure sandbox where it can do its own thing. And it can explore its environment, access web servers, and explore everything it needs to fulfill your prompts. Then you can communicate with it, make sure it's doing what you want, and then you can lock it. And essentially now you have an agent from scratch and you didn't write any code. And again, that agent only has 8 tools. The 7 core POSIX tools in Linux: cat, find, grep, tree, write, search and replace, make dir, and 1 tool for it to execute its own code. That's it. What we worked on at Build Club is something that we're calling context agents. So context agents essentially build themselves. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it systemprompt.md. And I'm going to keep this really, really broad, right? Which is, can you connect to this URL and help me build an agent to understand some of my favorite authors? And then I'm going to go ahead and say, let's review the prompt, which I actually didn't save it, so this is going to be interesting. And let's try out some connectivity. Now, the way that context agents work is we've given this agent a very secure runtime where it can write its own code and begin to explore its environment. So what it's actually done is it's written JavaScript code to find the files. It actually found the system prompt here. It then read it, and then it made sure that it could connect to Open Library. These LLMs are kind of automatically trained to explore. So when you give them just a little tiny bit of context, they'll begin to explore everything they need. So it says, look, context is working perfectly. Here's what I found. I can fetch authors. I can do all this stuff. Great. So now let's start to refine this a little bit more. So I'm going to say, can you create some tools so that we can query books and authors more effectively? And again, this is an example of the agent is actually going to code itself. So it has this secure runtime, and it can, using the system directory we have here, it can essentially create its own tools. And again, it loves to explore. So here we go. It's going to actually start writing tools.js, and it's going to create a function search authors. You know, we talk a lot about MCP servers and tools, but fundamentally tools are just programming functions. And so here we're just giving the agent the ability for it to write its own functions. And you can see it can write tools.js, it can add comments, it can then test out the functions that it got. And now it's actually refining it to find specific books and to find specific works of the author, so on and so forth. I found in my testing, this exploration can go on maybe a little bit too long. At this stage, it might call 30 different kind of different twists on what it's doing to make sure that it gets tools and functions the way it wants. But that's great because now we have a fully featured agent. So we talk about, oh, well, we need to code up an MCP server. All this context agent is saying is, you don't have to do that. Let the agent code the tools it wants. All from this little tiny system prompt, we've now started to develop this whole ecosystem. So I'm going to let it go here a little bit. It's going to keep refining, and then we'll see where it ends up and how it kind of summarizes everything that it discovered. So it got all this stuff. And look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tools that it wrote, that it tested, that it verified, that are now kind of aligned all from that little nugget of context that we gave it in the beginning. So the other thing is we can have it create skills. So again, it has this sandbox, this directory of that it can use. And so we can actually have it write its own skills. And just like skills, which are in a directory, maybe in your GitHub repo, our skills here are the same thing. So we're going to actually just say, hey, can you write some skills that are specific to certain genres? And it's going to create directories for those genres. And it's going to put skills files in there that it can use if we ask a specific question about romance or about science fiction. So this is great. So now we got tools, we got skills. We pretty much are all the way to having an agent. But let me just pull up one more thing. So there's one more thing I forgot, which is, can you check Reddit for some science fiction, fantasy recommendations? So here I've asked it to check Reddit. Now you'll see it's going to go ahead and try this, right? But again, I talked about this being a secure sandbox, and let's just see how it responds. You can see it's starting to write JavaScript code, trying to get this ready. It's running all this in a secure sandbox. Now, it says, I gather recommendations for you, but I hit a network access limitation with Reddit. When we started our context agent, we said it could only access Open Library, and it's quickly figured that out. So it's essentially using its own knowledge. You could to fill in this stuff, but that's okay, because again, this was just meant to demonstrate the way the sandbox works. So it can only manipulate the files in its file tree, and it can only access certain it can only access certain websites that we've given it permission for. So now let's actually finalize this thing. So we got tools, we got skills, and what I'm going to say is, let's make a new system prompt. Let's make a system prompt that actually reflects the capabilities. So there we go. We have an agent completely done from scratch. Now this is the best part. So down here, there's a little button, and we're going to say read only. And now that we say it's read only, we are basically not letting it continue to edit what it's doing. And that's what's really fun about this is, again, now it's read only. So it should actually operate a little bit faster. So now let's actually go in on something here. So, I'm interested in the collector's edition of William Gibson books. I'm going to say enter. And again, we should see it now be a little bit more directed to use its tools, fetch what we need, and respond. And now what I can do is I can actually download all these files, right? So I've now downloaded that to my machine, show you how we can now incorporate this into DataRobot. Okay, great. So here we are. So now I'm here in Visual Studio Code, and this is what we call recipe. Recipes are ways that we publish. Some of you may be familiar with our DataRobot community repositories, and we publish all of these kind of templated application. And this is actually a fork of the main DataRobot agent application. So you see we have agent, fast API server, front-end web, MCP server. That's in the main agent. And so what I have here is I have front-end web, the web server, which is in web, and I have agent. And within agent, I have a folder called the context. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear this out because this is our sample context. So I'm going to go ahead and say delete. Yeah, move that to the trash. I have what we downloaded. So this is the context agent stuff that we downloaded. So this is the context. I'm just going to drag it in here. Replace the system prompt. There we go. This is all good. Here's the tools that it wrote. It actually wrote Reddit tools, even though they don't work. So we're going to just delete those. Good night. We have the genre docs, which is good. And now what we're going to do is we have to do a small edit to our Docker file, right? So when we start the CT agent server, openlibrary.org, and they're comma separated, which that should work. And everything, so we added our context, everything else should be the same. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say task deploy. So what it's doing now that I've hit task deploy is it's verifying all the packages, and it's actually going to create on DataRobot a full end-to-end deployment to basically put this up as a full model in DataRobot. So that includes its Docker container, that includes the deployed endpoints, and it's going to include the application. The application and stuff doesn't need to change. We just need to change the agent behind the scenes, and it kind of already knows that. So it's only changing the container and the agent, which we hold in these in the endpoint here. The agent, the application itself actually doesn't need to change at all. So it's port update 10 remain unchanged. So it knows about all that stuff, and it's keeping track of it for us. And it knows that it doesn't need to change everything. It just needs to change a few things. Here we go. Everything updated. So here on the DataRobot side, so this is the agent that we just deployed. It was last used a few hours ago. And we get this cool little view of all the components involved. Let's make this. So we have, this is the deployed agent, and these are the different applications. This is actually the code, which I'm going to go to for a second because this is actually kind of fun. As I said, all we're providing is the context. So we said this is the code. It's literally just our system prompt and our genre docs. Everything else is in the runtime, right? So our context agent runtime, everything else is just there. There's actually a lot more to this. So all this code here, again, is part of our DataRobot application components. So this all corresponds to the code here in web, right? So there's a database to kind of keep track of things. So this is like an end-to-end complete web application. So that's what it's starting up right now. So here's our system prompt. So here we go. And you can see it's exactly how we wanted it to run. And again, we didn't write any code. The agent wrote all of its own code. And that's what makes this so much fun. It writes its own tools. And then once you get to a place where it works, you put it in read-only mode so it can't edit itself. And then you deploy it. And then you're good to go.